By now you all have read or are certainly aware that the NCAA's Committee on Infractions released its final report regarding a more than 5-year review of the Ole Miss football athletics program. The report focused on 21 alleged violations of NCAA bylaws involving former coaches, staff, and student athletes in our football program. We are deeply disappointed and angered by the additional penalty of a 2018 postseason ban. It is simply not warranted and is based on fundamental flaws in the NCAA case and how the investigation was conducted. We will vigorously appeal the additional postseason ban. It is clearly an excessive punishment. And we are outraged at the unfair characterization of our football program and the university culture involving athletics. As we have stated before, for those violations that are backed up by facts, the university is in agreement and has accepted responsibility. And as the chair of the committee himself noted on the press call, we understand how serious the case was, and we took strong actions against those responsible for the violations. Every staff member, coach, or student athlete who was found to have committed an NCAA violation has already been held accountable. We do have institutional control, as those controls are how we discovered many of the violations, and those controls also provided strong compliance education to staff, students, and to boosters. Let me be clear, today is a sad day for the entire Ole Miss family. My heart breaks for the young men in our football program who displayed such resolve and focus in competing this season, despite knowing that there would be no postseason opportunity for them. And now the NCAA has unfairly punished these young men who have already been through so much. We will fight for them and appeal. I want to thank Ross Bjork for his leadership throughout this entire process and for fighting for Ole Miss. And I want to thank Coach Matt Luke for setting an example of character for our student athletes. I'm going to now turn things over to Ross Bjork.
Thank you, Chancellor Vitter. Thanks for being here this afternoon. This is obviously a very tough day for the university and our football program. Based on the decision from the Committee on Infractions earlier today, the young men in our football program who have already suffered so much will continue to feel the effects of this case. As was mentioned by the Chief Hearing Officer earlier today, our corrective action showed how serious we took this case. We self-imposed very meaningful penalties and took appropriate action to take responsibility for the actions that resulted in violations. The committee accepted all of our self-imposed penalties and determined that our case was a level 1 standard case. However, we are in strong disagreement over the addition of the 2018 postseason ban and plan to launch the appeal right away. We believe that today's decision from the committee is an excessive application of the penalty structure, and the citing of previous University of Mississippi infractions cases from more than 30 years ago is not applicable to our current case. Considering that we are one of only 3 SEC institutions that went more than 20 years without a major infractions matter, this is a gross misapplication of the charge of lack of institutional control. The question is, when does a university get a clean slate in the infractions process? There are many factors that call into question the procedures of this case and the credibility of evidence that was presented at the hearing. We plan to restate those facts in our appeal materials. There are other aspects of the case that we will also appeal, and we will determine the specifics of those matters in the next few days. From the very beginning, our approach to the investigation has been consistent. We focused upon 2 things. First, when we uncovered facts that were violations, we took appropriate and decisive action based upon those facts. Second, when facts did not support allegations or we felt the process was unfair, we challenged the NCAA. We indicated our disagreement in very forceful and strategic aspects as evidenced by our numerous filings, letters, and pushback over the past few years. Something changed in the spring and summer of 2016, and we strongly disagree with the tactics used by the enforcement staff to keep us isolated in the final months of the investigation. This will also be a basis for our appeal. Our responsibility to compliance has been and always will be the cornerstone of Ole Miss athletics, as evidenced by our consistent proactive approach to compliance, rules education, and monitoring. I'm grateful for Chancellor Vitter's unwavering leadership and support through this entire process. He exemplifies a steadfast commitment to integrity that permeates every aspect of our university. We are here for our student athletes in our 18 sports, and that mission will not change. Since we are digesting the full report, there are many things that we may not have answers for today. We wish that this were over, but there is more work to be done, and that work has already started. Now I believe we'll take questions.
Chancellor Vitter, based on everything that's transpired in the last 5 years, do you feel the NCAA is corrupt?
Let me answer more specifically. You can draw your own conclusions. I think something happened, quite frankly, about a year and a half ago, just before the draft night from 2016. The course of this investigation changed. The entire conduct went from one of cooperation to one where we were shut up, where information that should have been obvious to pursue, that we would have certainly noticed and followed up on, was not. And by the time the facts became known to us, that information was no longer available because of the time-sensitive nature. That's an example where we could have been led to an entirely different conclusion on some very key matters. So I really am very upset about the way that this process was conducted. It was unfair. It was not appropriate for our university, for our student athletes.
Ross, what wins will you guys have to vacate?
That is still being determined. Again, we're just digesting the full report, and so we're not exactly sure until we go through each of the findings, if you will, and determine the seasons. We know some, but until we go through the final report, we're not exactly sure the vacation of wins yet.
This is for Ross or the Chancellor. You talked about April or the spring of 2016. Was there a moment that the tenor and the tone changed with the NCAA? Was there an interaction, a specific instance that you thought this is going in a different direction?
Well, roughly at that time was the draft night, although I think the change actually happened shortly before that. It was just the situation where we were not apprised of situations that the NCAA was concerned about. So we could not conduct our own investigation. We could not provide relevant information. And we were not given access to the sources of information that the NCAA was looking at. That is grossly unfair.
This question is for Ross. There was in the original notice of allegations, the committee came out and said that you guys didn't exhibit exemplary cooperation. Today on the conference call, Rick Christopher said that both the university and also former head coach Hugh Freeze did exemplary cooperation. What's going on with all of that? Because it's kind of confusing.
Well, I think to their credit, they acknowledge, the resources that were spent on this case, the time that it has taken to get information on the table. And I think a lot of it, again, was really self-discovered by our institution, by our compliance program. And so they did not cite exemplary cooperation. So I don't understand how people feel. We did cooperate because we pushed back. We made sure that everything we did was based on fact. And if there were violations, we took action. And if there were disagreements, that we did push back. So exemplary cooperation is only one strategy in the overall tone and tenor of this process, but we do have an obligation as an NCAA member institution to cooperate. We would rather be a part of the process than isolated, because we know what happens when you're isolated. And I think we felt the effects of that after spring, summer 2016.
Was there ever a specific issue with anyone at the NCAA in terms of enforcement, COI, where Ole Miss made a request to say, hey, this is inappropriate, or we object to this particular matter?
I think, again, we're putting a lot of documents onto our website, umncaacase.com. There's a lot of those filings, a lot of letters that were sent either directly to the enforcement staff, or once we got our notice of allegations in a committee hearing date, were sent directly to the chief hearing officer. So all of that is in there. So it's not really one individual. It's the process. It's the manner, again, in which we were isolated from that process that we pushed back on, and we wanted access to the facts, and we felt that we were shut out of those facts.
So it was more procedural, it wasn't necessarily an individual action or person inside the NCAA, you felt it was more procedural?
Correct.
Ross, this is for you. Does it anger you and the rest of the staff that for most of this investigation in the better part of the last few years, it was just Leo Lewis's word against yours, and that was the main source of a lot of the information?
You know, again, a lot of this will go into our appeal, but we are shocked that they found him credible. That was listed in the report today. So we are shocked by that based on all the mountain of evidence that was presented. But a lot of those bases will be part of our appeal. Are we sad? Are we angry for the institution, for our young men? Absolutely. We think that they have suffered long enough. The institution has suffered long enough. When you cite cases from 30 years ago, that is not part of the process. We think that is unprecedented in some ways to be part of this. And so, yeah, there's anger, there's frustration, there's sadness, but now we have to go to work and make sure we get back on track.
This is for you, Ross. What will the appellate process entail, and are there additional avenues for action if it isn't successful, such as potentially rolling into pending lawsuits currently to file for a stay, for example, against the bowl ban and kind of fight it in court?
We have 15 days to state that we are appealing, and so we'll file that as soon as possible, hopefully early next week, that we are appealing. We'll submit, a lot of our materials are already written, back to the question earlier. A lot of our materials, we believe, are already written. And so then after that, we'll submit those materials. It's probably a 3 to 6 month process. We don't exactly know, because it depends on the turnaround time of some aspects of it. But sometime in early 2018, we hope to have a final outcome. And we're appealing the postseason ban. We're appealing the lack of institutional control, and then the other things are to be determined.
Some clarification, Ross, on the transfer rules. There's a one more year bowl ban. Will players that are not rising seniors next year be eligible to transfer if they ask for a waiver?
I know there's been a lot.
And second part of that question, can other schools start poaching or recruiting the Ole Miss players now?
Well, that's already happened. We know that's already happened. The poaching is already happened. And so here's how it works. Anyone with 1 year of eligibility remaining, rising seniors, right? They have to notify us of their desire to transfer. And then the receiving institution may file for them to be immediately eligible, right? And so that's that process for kids with 1 year remaining. Anyone with multi-years remaining has to go through the normal transfer process. They would have to arrive at their institution. That institution would have to file a waiver through the NCAA, and then it'd be evaluated from there. We don't make that decision. That's the NCAA that makes that decision on multi-years remaining of eligibility.
Ross, 1,000 times during this process, you commented everybody in this room, but it seemed like 1,000 times information leaked out from the other side. And I want to ask you about my original question. Does that add credence to my theory that they're corrupt?
You know, it's hard to really address the leaks. The chief hearing officer addressed that on the teleconference today. So obviously the committee was frustrated by that as well. We can't control leaks. We know that we were not part of any strategy to leak or deceive or anything like that. We wanted the truth. We wanted the facts. If leaks are out there on either side, we can't control it. We have to go based on what we know, and we try to take action head on and take the responsibility necessary. So the leak part, it's hard to say. Who would ever investigate that? I think that's a question for the NCAA that they'll have to answer at some point in time.